Martin. All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Hausman, and I am the president of Arupe Virtual. My role this evening is really small. I get to say welcome and thank you for attending. And then I get to do the opening prayer and introduce you to my colleague, David Martino. And so with that, I am going to begin with one of my favorite prayers, and it's a prayer from Thomas Merton. And it maybe it fits this in terms of your feelings about AI, maybe not, but I'm gonna this is the prayer I'm choosing to use this today. So, my Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Okay, so with that, thank you all once again for being here. David Martino is our newest colleague at Arupe Virtual, and I just wanted to give him a quick thank you for putting this webinar series together, and then obviously Brian and Elaine for taking part in leading the conversation. So my role this evening is done, and I'm going to turn you over to David. David, do you want to take it from here?
Thank you very much, Jeff. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here and get started. So my name is David Martino, as Jeff introduced me. I'm the Director of Partnerships, Design, and Professional Development with AV Alive. I've worked in Catholic schools and colleges for about 20 years, and I'm very excited to be here today with you all, with Elaine, with Brian, and with Jeff, and that opening prayer. So just a little bit of a context setter. We know we're here to talk about how we approach AI in the classroom. I just want to start off with a little bit of context, just a very brief introduction to Elaine and Brian, and then we'll have our Q&A at the end of that. So we can use the Q&A button on your screens if you'd like to. We'll collect questions. We will hold them until the latter half of the webinar, and then share the questions with both panelists, and then engage in a dialogue between them in response to the various questions that are offered to us. We are recording this, and we will share it out as well. So just a little bit of context. As we know, schools have historically had to mediate advances in technology right on the ground, in the classrooms. New technologies emerge, and teachers have to then figure out what the technology is or isn't, how it can or can't be used for education, and oftentimes how to manage it with young people or students who often know more about the technologies than we do in the moment. AI really is no different. It may feel a little more overwhelming than some previous iterations of technology, changes in tech, because the advances have been so fast and so furious. We hosted a summer teaching institute this past summer in Cleveland on AI, and even in the short months over which we planned the conference, the topics changed and unfolded in various ways that we hadn't even anticipated, because the changes were literally happening that quickly. Different versions of AI software, different developments, responses from government agencies, school boards, school districts, schools, teachers. And so all these things are happening and lead us to the point that we are at here today. We're really excited to be here with Elaine and Brian, because both of them have been engaged in thinking about AI in their own particular contexts and ways. And so they're going to share with us those experiences and guide us through some ways of thinking about how we approach AI in the classroom. And just, again, not necessarily to provide prescriptive responses or answers to what our questions are, but to guide us in the dialogue that is necessary to have when considering the role of AI in Catholic schools. Elaine is going to talk us through the first part of our presentation here, which is AI proactively. So wrapping our heads around AI in the classroom. And Brian is not necessarily going to respond or rebut, but he'll present an AI considered reactively. What does detection mean? And how do we find the right approach when we consider detection? And then, of course, we'll have our Q&A. So a little bit about our panelists. I got these lovely pictures of each of them. I'm sure they're both very, very happy that I did. Elaine has taught at in both public and private secondary schools and at the college level for a number of years. She's been at Creighton Prep for this is currently her 22nd year at Creighton Prep, where she teaches English and facilitates the Writing Center. One fun fact about Elaine is that she and her dog Nora are partners in the search for the perfect nap. I thought that was a lovely little bit of info. Brian has been in Jesuit education for 17 years at St. John's Jesuit, where he teaches history and government. He teaches computer science and theology for AVLI, as well as being the sort of AVLI, I want to call him the director of administrative technology, but he keeps pushing the title away. But he manages AVLI's Moodle site and is very engaged with educational technology and changes therein. So welcome both to Elaine and to Brian, and we'll get started here with Elaine.
All right, great. Well, thanks for being here, everyone. And yeah, I'm Elaine Ayers. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, where I teach English, run the Writing Center, and I was part of the conference in Cleveland this summer. And so yeah, I'm excited to talk to everybody about this today. As I present this information, this first slide I have talks about locate yourself on the spectrum. That's kind of lame for this crowd, because I know that probably everybody looking at this spectrum, no one identifies on the blue end. I'm just here to teach. And there might be a few of us on the yellow end, like giddy up, let's do this AI stuff, and the two spectrums concern me. I suspect most of us are somewhere in that gray middle of, whoa, another massive change. And this slide was part of a presentation I did with our own faculty here, but I elected to keep it on this in this presentation because it has dawned on me as I've been thinking more and more about AI, how much of COVID is this holdover for me. And I don't think I've been alone with this. When, in November of last year, when we first started seeing AI and what ChatGPT-3 at the time meant. And, I really felt myself getting unmoored, that I can't take another massive change. I don't know what the last 3 years of my life have even been. And so, as I've approached AI and as I participated in the conference this summer, something that I found was how much COVID colored things for me. And I know I'm not alone with that. Teachers have been through so much in the last few years. And so where I saw myself, really wanting to freak out about AI was I discerned over time, I was having kind of a COVID hangover with that, where we were having to, build the plane as we flew the plane. And what I have come to realize is that's not what this is. So if someone needs consolation with that, I'm here to say that is not the kind of change that this is. I'm old enough to have taught when the internet became like the new thing in the classroom. And I think this is much more of what AI is, and I guess the overwhelming side of that is like, that's massive, that's huge. But for me, the consoling side of it is like, I don't have to learn the internet in a few weeks. Like you can make progress with AI. You don't have to learn it all at once. The way we had to be flying with every engine during the shutdown and during hybrid years. So if you find yourself worried with AI, not for nothing. There's a lot, but we've got time, and so that's where we are. As we're not where we were, and I find that to be very consoling. I also encourage us to, as much as we might want to resist diving in with this, to remember where our students are. Of course, we need to look at this because the kids already know what this is, or they already know about it. They're using it, and they need our guidance. Without us, it's going to be possible for kids to bypass engagement and bypass learning. If we're not finding ways to make some inroads with this for ourselves, and for me as a teacher and someone who thinks about kids a lot, I'm more concerned for the mental health effects of teachers abdicating some leadership with AI. If kids can really disengage from learning, and I've taught in different places, I know like there are places where teachers aren't supported. If kids are put in positions where they can disengage from learning, they're going to pay the consequences with their mental health first. We saw that in COVID. Disengagement doesn't help anybody. So, we have to take leadership with this. We have to find ways to get footholds with AI as we guide our students through it. So, yeah, can we move on? So there's a bigger hope that I offer with this too, other than it's not COVID. The bigger hope I think that we have with this is, I think integral to our leadership is relationships. So when I came back from this conference in July, I was meeting with one of our assistant principals who was, honestly, I was kind of spinning out because there's a lot to digest. There's a lot to process with AI. And I was having a hard time getting traction with where I thought I would be useful. And so what she told me was, Elaine, just give me one sentence. What do we need to know? And I'm kind of a catastrophist and a pessimist. And I said, well, if you're bad at relationships, you are sunk. And then she said, well, that's really good news then, because we are not bad at relationships, and we're good at them. And I know that the people at this webinar are good at relationships. Relationships, I think, are the foundation for this. Like David was saying a little while ago, AI is changing all the time. When I presented this information 6 weeks ago, there's stuff that's already outdated. Relationships aren't. That is our anchor as we proceed forward with this. And so I'm here to talk about like kind of the proactive front end methods and tactics you can use as you think about AI and start figuring out where you want to make your inroads with it. Transparency, I think, is going to be the first most effective tool in our toolbox. If we are transparent with our students that we know that AI is out there, we know students use it, and we're interested in it, and we're educating ourselves on it, and we're curious about it, there are going to be a lot of students who will prevent themselves from talk themselves out of making bad decisions we don't know how much work transparency will save us. Where are you going? And so, like, you know, Brian's going to talk about this stuff in a lot of detail, a lot of breadth and depth. But just as an FYI, I teach English, I teach a lot of writing. I disclose to my students from day one, there are means of AI detection that I use to make sure that they are doing authentic work. And, you know, and so they know that from the front end, that's on the front of my mind. And something that I think has been a cornerstone for me, though, with that transparency, is to make sure my messaging emphasizes I'm here for accountability, of course, you know, but this isn't cat and mouse. This accountability is more of an expression of the cura personalis. The accountability is about me caring about you, my student, in your future. And it's also about my understanding that you students are entering a world where this technology is going to be ubiquitous. And you're going to be entering a world where, like, anybody can prompt a bot. You know, any idiot can prompt a bot to do something. I need to hold you accountable to bringing your authentic self, your real engagement to class, so you're equipped for that world. So you are somebody who knows how to navigate this meaningfully. And so I try to make the messaging about them. There have been times in my career where I've been very much cat and mouse, like, I dare you guys, I dare you to cheat here. That doesn't work for me as I've mellowed with age, but I think it also really doesn't work with this paradigm we're in right now. I think when students know that we care about them and we have credibility that we care about them, that I hold you accountable as a function of care, you know, and that I'm building relationships with you as a function of care, they'll be much more likely to engage and to talk to us when they're having trouble engaging. Again, Ryan is going to talk a lot about resources in depth and breadth, but in the next slide that I'd like us to look at, I just offer like a way of recognizing we're not in COVID. We already right now have resources that we're using. You know, we're not having to start from the ground up with new technologies and new workflows and new ways of doing things. We have lots of methods we touch every day that maybe we want to reframe a little bit, or maybe we want to like pursue this feature of this thing I use all the time, you know, like the lockdown mode of my learning management system. Maybe I want to rethink how I'm going to grade, you know, how I'm going to categorize my grades. But we have access to that stuff here and now. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the modifications that we're going to use that we can use with you know, our approaches, the way we take stock of the things we do. So at the front end, I think it can be really helpful as we design assignments, as we design assessments and units, you know, to focus on some questions that orient us more toward process over product, more toward skill, less toward content. You know, so what is the skill I want students to develop? What process do I want them to perform? What are the ways students can show their work with this assignment so I can see authentic engagement. It might not be at the end product. And then how can I help students recognize their own voices, their own perspectives within their, where who they are is vital to their demonstration of understanding what they've learned. A method that I think can work very well with this is this idea of chunking. And so instead of making a single draft or a single product, you know, a final product, the grade, we can evaluate processes with discrete tasks, with brainstorming, evidence gathering, you know, micro and macro drafting, with revising. So it might mean we end up giving fewer final assessments. You know, for a class like mine, it might mean fewer final drafts, but a lot more attention to the processes within it, more direct attention with the processes within it. And then with assessing, I've included some attention to grading, like into the idea of category weights, and I've put a question mark there. I've just noticed as our school year has gone on, there has been a diversity of opinions among really great teachers I know. There are some of us like me who are big fans of, okay, as I assess, I want to make sure that I'm protecting, or I'm protecting the grades where the students are going to be most proctored, they're going to be synthesizing information. I want to make sure those categories, the categories where they're most likely to be doing their authentic work, they're going to get a higher category weight. There are other teachers who really like to go with total points and can eloquently address that. I'm noticing anecdotally the people who are most inclined to do total points are really good at math. And they're really good at like keeping a running tally of points all semester. That's not my skill. And so I don't know. I wonder if that's where the difference is. But I think we need to give ourselves permission to think about, like, how is my grade composed? How is my evaluation of student work ultimately composed? And is that something that makes sense to support student authentic learning? What I'm a little bit more excited about is I think AI gives us explicit permission to humanize our assessments. So grading discussions, grading audience participation, like teaching explicitly to what we expect of our students to be human beings in a classroom. You know, having conference grades or evaluating students in the form of an oral exam, you know, having reflection grades where students discuss their work. Those, I think several years ago, if someone would have said, you can give grades for that stuff, I think I would have said, yeah, you can if you're soft. And I don't feel that way anymore. I know to a lot of us that probably sounds soft. Like, for example, one thing I've started doing in recent years is in discussions, in, you know, class projects, I'll award students grades for their work as audience members, that they're graded for the quality of questions they ask, and they're graded for their nonverbal communication. Here's how you become a difference maker in a classroom when you're in the position of not saying anything, or where you're in the position of thinking about what someone else is saying. It sounds like kind of a soft grade. I'm telling you, it's made a huge difference in the quality of discussion that we've had. And it's made my classroom a much more alive, a much more human place. I've given a sample of a reflection question. So our school uses Canvas as our LMS. And I give a lot of reading quizzes in the literature classes I teach, and that's kind of my standard homework grade. At the end of every reading quiz, students get a reflection question, which is worth usually like 40% of their grade. And the reflection question has really nothing to do with their comprehension of the assignment. But like 1 to 4 sentences tell me how this assignment went for you. You could tell me something that made an impression, what you didn't understand. Were you able to actually read the assignment? I just want to know how you're doing, how your work is going. I can't believe this question arose with COVID when I stopped giving paper quizzes. There are very few elements of COVID that I think have been net improvements, but this is one of them. I can't believe how much my students will tell me in that simple reflection question, and how much that supports the relationships I have with them. Because I can check it, and it takes me a second to read this sentence, and it's easy points. It protects kids from zeros when they're having bad weeks, and the bottom drops out of their grade. But my ability to connect with students gives me credibility that I care about them. I care about them with accountability, and I care about who they are as human beings. So when a kid tells me in his reflection question, it has been a bad week in my house, I'm able to give that kid support, and which is important by itself. But I think in this AI world, it's also important for this relationship that allows me to check in with students. I have credibility there too, that I want what's best for you. So let's figure out how you're learning. Let's figure out how to support your learning. And they're more inclined to trust me with, yeah, I thought about plagiarizing, or, I'm really frustrated with this assignment. How do I get ahead with it? So I don't treat this question as like a gotcha. Like if a kid says I used a summary, I really refrain from that, and maybe tell them in a writing conference, like, no, you'd probably have better ideas if you'd managed to read more of the text. But I say that in a spirit of advocacy, in a spirit of care for the student. Okay, and finally, let's talk about, actually using AI. And so I've got a working draft going of the norms I've set with my students, the norms the students and I have talked about, for when it's okay to use AI. It's okay to use AI maybe to clarify a topic that you don't understand, that you've tried to understand, you don't understand. It's okay to use AI to check on an answer that you're unsure of, maybe. I put asterisks around this to emphasize it's okay to carefully prompt AI to proofread your writing for mechanical errors, because my students and I have seen the hard way. If you're not careful about how you prompt AI to support your writing, it can take over a lot, and it can trigger some detection that to raise some false positives. And of course, it's always okay to see me as your teacher for guidance, to ensure that you're using AI in a way that's ethical and that promotes engagement. And then of course, definitely don't copy or represent AI responses as your own work. Don't use AI in your writing without discussing it with me first, to make sure that you're on solid footing with it. Don't presume that your teacher won't know, that I won't know if you've used AI. And don't expect AI to be right, and definitely don't expect AI to offer a perspective that's better than yours. And so, I'm working with seniors on their college essays. We'll prompt AI college essays. They're lousy. They're clean, they're grammatically clean, they're fluid, but they're lousy. And students can see, like, yeah, my imperfect work is actually far superior to what AI can do in this context. So when I reflect on the do's and don'ts, the discernment that I think I'm working on is recognizing where that boundary between learning and non-learning, recognizing helping my students try to recognize when does a use of AI support engagement and when does it bypass? Am I using AI in a way that's going to allow me to go deeper? Or am I using AI in a way that allows me to focus on the real task? I ask AI to clean up the grammar so I can focus on the idea. And then when does AI bypass engagement? And so, I think we're in a new time. We're living in this gray area, and I think it's okay for us as teachers to allow ourselves some of that gray area as well. Like, we're discerning this too. And I think it's smart to have guidelines, but also not to hamstring ourselves with absolutes right now. We're still living our way into this. And finally, of course, there are applications for teachers using AI. I'm sure many of us have already found some of, we can use AI to create prompts. We can use AI to generate examples. When a kid asks for an example and we can't think of one, that happens to me all the time. Maybe we could use AI for, the standard emails to parents where everybody has to get one of these. It doesn't require a lot of nuance, or helping us figure out ways to make accommodations to lessons, maybe to draft a letter of recommendation, or to organize a letter of recommendation, maybe with writing some quizzes and tests, organizing a syllabus, planning lessons. But my point is, there are ways that AI will allow us to focus on our real jobs, to take care of some of what sometimes feels like the minutia or the handcuffs that we've got to attend to, that doesn't feel like our real job, that doesn't feel like student learning. And so if we are if we can see how AI can allow us to really be ourselves and bring our authentic selves to our work, I think we need to be open to having conversations with our students and being open to them trying to navigate that as well. So having that understanding of, we're here to guide them, but we're here to help them navigate. And if we can do that with authentic relationships, I think we've got a fighting chance. I actually think everything's possible. Without those relationships, without the credibility in those relationships, I don't know how much we can really do. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you, Elaine. It's a great transition, I think, now to how we might react or respond. Maybe sometimes we feel the anxiety of those relationships, or that we feel the absence of them. Maybe we haven't built them up in quite that way. So we turn to a sort of a different modality with this. But Brian's going to talk us through ways we might react to AI.
Okay, so the first thing, one of the kind of initial impulses that we might have when dealing with tools like ChatGPT is, how do I figure out whether my students are using it? And that impulse, I hope I'm going to demonstrate here that impulse might not be exactly the right one, or exactly where we should be going. That it's not as much about detection as, again, facilitating those sets of relationships within our classroom. So there are a lot of different AI systems out there. ChatGPT, Google's got a system called Bard. There's Claude. There's a dozen of them out there that each work in different ways. And pretty much since ChatGPT was released last November, there very quickly were companies that were claiming that they were able to detect ChatGPT usage. And basically the answer there is that they can and they can't. It's a little bit of both. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things here that will sort of demonstrate why we shouldn't be relying on this. So the first was this is Bing's version of ChatGPT. This is the Bing chat. And one of the things that came up in the conference, there were a couple of people who were suggesting that one way to get AI to figure out whether a student is using AI is just to paste it into ChatGPT and ask, did you write this? And so I wanted to demonstrate first that that does not work. So I had ChatGPT write a passage about the French and Indian War. And then I asked it, I opened a new ChatGPT window in Bing and I said, was this text written by a human being? And pasted the passage that ChatGPT had written. And ChatGPT says, I don't know for sure, but it seems like a human written text to me, because it's using correct facts, it's using accurate grammar, etc. So don't rely on that. Let's move on to the next one. So then I kind of prompted ChatGPT a little bit further, and it actually got mad at me. So it said that it wasn't written. It said it was not written by ChatGPT when I actually asked it, did ChatGPT write this? And then when I asked again if it was written by an AI, it basically said that it would like to have a more engaging and interesting conversation with me. Do not repeat this question again. And again, this was a passage that was written by an AI that I pasted directly into ChatGPT. All right, next slide. And so then I went over to ChatGPT or to GPT-0, and I started pasting some things in there. And GPT-0 did a relatively good job figuring out whether AI written items were written by AI. It actually was able to detect AI writing most of the time, probably about 95% of the time. However, it did not do a very good job at human created writing. So I looked through my stuff and I found something that I knew couldn't possibly have been written by AI. I pulled out my master's thesis from back in 2006, and I pasted a paragraph from my master's thesis into GPT-0. And GPT-0 said that my text had a moderate likelihood of being written by AI. Now, it didn't say it 100% was sure that it was written by AI, but it said it had a moderate likelihood of being written by AI. And I think that there are a lot of teachers that might look at that moderate likelihood and try to use this to make a case against a student. And that's definitely not something you ought to do, because the problem that a lot of these things have, like GPT-0, is that they come up with false positives. There will be quite a few cases where you'll put text that was written by a student into this detection software, and it will say it has a moderate likelihood or a good likelihood of being written by AI. It is relatively rare for it to say that it's 100% sure that something that's student written has been written by AI, but there have actually been some colleges that are refraining from using any of these tools because of the likelihood of false positives. They don't want to accuse a student of plagiarism based off of something that they don't know whether it's going to give them a false positive. All right, next one. So as I'm thinking about this, there's a few things that we can do to deal with AI in the classroom. And first, I want to echo a couple of the points that Elaine was making, because there many of the things that we can do in our classrooms have to do with our pedagogy, has to do with what we're trying to teach the students and being clear with them about the skills that we're teaching them. And so I think Elaine's point that we should focus more on the process, looking more at the steps that the students take, is a very good one. Basically, we need to be sure that students understand what we're going for in an assessment. Are we checking their outlining skills? Are we checking their information synthesis skills? Are we checking transition sentences between paragraphs? Because the more granular that we can get with that, the less likely that that is something that can be easily AI generated. Sure, AI can generate an outline, but it's more difficult for the AI to go from step to step to step to step. And if we're checking student work at each step of the way as they're moving towards a final product, then it's less likely that it will be used. So what specifically are you teaching students to do? What is the skill that this exercise in your classroom is meant to be teaching? And then make sure that students know, what that skill is, that they know the purpose of the lesson. And think more in terms of short formative assessments in trying to teach these skills. Now, I would suggest there is definitely a place for summative assessment. We will talk about how to do summative assessment with AI as a reality here in just a second. But with these formative assessments, these are skill builders. These are not necessarily places where you've got a massive grade attached, where students should feel like they need to jump to something like a ChatGPT, right, in order to get the grade. Instead, it's about developing skill. And part of that is also about the kinds of conversations around integrity that we have with our students and developing a kind of culture of integrity in our classrooms. Can you go on? So part of this is, again, developing a kind of learning community in our classrooms. We need to know who our students are. We need to know more than just their interests. In a way, we need to know their voice, because that's the best way to really discern whether students are using something like ChatGPT. AI systems have a fairly distinctive voice, and that is one concrete thing I think that you can do in order to come to terms with AI, is go and play around with ChatGPT or with these systems and read the responses, because there's a particular tone that you get. Now, it's not there's nothing exact. I can't give you exact things to look for, but as teachers, we get used to reading students' tone. We get used to what our students sound like in the papers that they write for us. And ChatGPT, in the same way, has that kind of tone. And so knowing what that tone is, we'll be able to identify it in relation with our students' tone. So it's kind of the same trick that we've been using for years, dealing with normal plagiarism. If it doesn't sound like a kid wrote it, then it might be written by something other than the kid. Can we go back to that slide, please? Okay, so we want to have some conversations with our students about integrity issues. Basically, I put it in the syllabus on the first day. I know that this is out there. I know what it can do. And here's my expectations for the proper use of it in this class. And that can be that we're not going to use it at all. It can be that you can use it for outlining, but not for final product. You as a teacher, you determine how you believe ChatGPT could be used. And then also we need to understand why students are taking shortcuts like this. So I think it's really important as teachers that we're aware of what else is going on in our building. What kinds of things are other teachers assigning? Because if students have, for example, 100 note cards due for their senior paper, and they've also got a 3-page essay in your history class, then it's likely that you might see more ChatGPT use on that essay. If there's big things that they have to do, because our students, as we all know, are not particularly good time managers. So if we have a lot of big assignments due on the same day, we're likely to see more cheating and more ChatGPT. So try to understand why students are taking shortcuts and try to alleviate that. So at my school, we have a list that we put out every Sunday that has all of the assignments that are in PowerSchool for the next week for all of the classes. One of our tutors puts it together. And so I can look at that and say, I've got an essay due on this day. What else do my colleagues have that they're expecting on that day as well? And I can kind of tailor what I'm going to do that week based on what's on that list. Okay, next. So then there are some ways that we can use some software to evaluate students' work product to do this kind of summative assessment. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So go to the next one. So one thing that we can use is Google Docs and Google Drive. Google Drive has a really great feature called version history or revision history. Google Drive's revision history keeps track of every change that's made to a Google Doc, basically minute by minute. So you can see the sort of construction of the document as it's happening. So that can be good for two different things. It can be good for watching the construction of a paper taking place. So you can see the process that your students use. You know, do they start with an outline and then build from there? Are they starting with introduction and conclusion, or do they add that at the end? So that can be interesting. You can also see when students cut and paste large chunks of text into the document. And those are the cases where you're likely seeing the use of something like ChatGPT. Or just standard run-of-the-mill plagiarism. So look for those places where students are putting a large chunk of text into the document. And if you're not seeing that kind of process of writing happening, then you know that you have a conversation to have with your students. Now, in order to use something like Google Drive version history, you need to be an editor on the student's document. So if you're using something like Google Classroom or Schoology, and you use a Google Drive, make a Google Drive assessment or assignment, it pretty much automatically makes you an editor. So you already have this capability. But otherwise, you may have to have the students list you as an editor on the document so that you can comment and see the version history. The second thing is a lockdown browser. So the lockdown browser is the best thing that we have to keep assessments within the classroom secure. What the lockdown browser does is it takes an assessment that's being done in a learning management system like Schoology or Canvas, and it locks the students in so that they can't go into any other tabs or anything else on their device while they're taking this assessment. So if you're doing any kind of in-class written work and you're allowing them to use devices, that in-class written work should be done using a lockdown browser. If your school has a lockdown browser enabled already in your LMS and Canvas or Schoology or whatever you use, then make sure that you enable that, not just for quizzes and tests, but also for in-class essays. Because with that lockdown browser, you can usually give students certain websites that are whitelisted that you are allowing them to use while they're putting this together. So you could give them access to, for example, a Google Drive that has resources for their essay, but keep them out of other things. So this can really easily ensure the integrity of in-class work. I teach at St. John's Jesuit in Toledo, Ohio, and we use Schoology, and we have the Respondus lockdown browser baked into Schoology, and it works fairly well for that. And you can also use those plagiarism checkers, but when you use a plagiarism checker like GPT-0, use it as a conversation starter, not as a gotcha. We're in kind of a different mode than we used to be. It used to be that you gather all of your evidence of plagiarism, and then you make the case, and then have the conversation with the student where you lay it all out. We can't really do that anymore. It's sort of like we're in the era before Google, where we are noticing a difference in our students' tone. You know, we're noticing that maybe the quality of their writing is different than what we're expecting. And so that's a place for a conversation to begin with students about the proper use of ChatGPT. And that could be where we go with that. Okay, next one. Strategies for evaluating the student's work product. So here are some of the things that we can do. Various classroom strategies, peer review can be really good here because students will call each other out. especially, if one student thinks that another student is using ChatGPT. You may hear the chatter as you're walking around the classroom, listening to them reviewing each other's papers. And that can be a place where you can kind of insert yourself into the situation and discuss that. Verbal explanations are really good. So this is not just presentation. If you suspect that a student is using ChatGPT, have the student explain the concept to you. Because most often what's happening is the student typed a prompt into ChatGPT, took whatever ChatGPT spit out, and is trying to turn that into you. So they probably don't have a really good grasp of the subject matter. So if you ask them to explain their writing to you, you will be pretty easily able to see whether they actually understand what they've written. And so a verbal explanation can be a great strategy to deal with that. Creative projects. ChatGPT can do some creative projects. It can write scripts and do, DALL-E can even create computer-generated art. But sometimes creative projects can be a little bit harder for an AI to do well. So for example, I used to do a project with my theology classes, with my ethics classes, where I had them imagine that 3 of the philosophers that we talked about in that unit walked into a coffee shop and were discussing, a particular topic over coffee, and they had to write a script. That is a much harder thing for ChatGPT to do than just write an essay about the similarities and differences between these 2 philosophers' thought. And then I would suggest that most of the weight in our grades go to the proctored assignments and assessments. So the formative assessment is where we're trying to get them to develop skills, and those things should have a relatively low weight, mostly completion or effort. And then the proctored assessments, the summative assessments, is where we put most of the grade weight, because those are things that we can actually watch over using a lockdown browser, or we can watch them create the thing in class. Also, don't be afraid of paper and pencil. Paper and pencil assessments are perfectly fine. There's no reason not to do that, although it does make life a little bit harder for us as teachers, right, to grade those paper assessments. All right, then when students cheat, what do we do? Mostly, I believe that this is a point for us to have a conversation about integrity. We need to remember that these are kids, and kids will try to take shortcuts. And so conversation, is really the place to go. We also need to recognize that proof is not possible. We will not be able to prove with 100% certainty that a student used ChatGPT. We can provide some evidence. Like I said, you can ask questions of the students to have them try to explain the work. But it has to be more of a conversation rather than a confrontation with the student. Now, that is at least at first. In most cases, when you confront a student and you say, I believe you used ChatGPT to write this, their response will often just be, yes, I did. I'm sorry, right? If that happens, you're in good shape. If the student completely denies the use of ChatGPT, that's the point where you start to have them explain the work, where you might involve others, counselors, parents for the discussion. But remember, this is a conversation about acceptable use rather than confrontation. And then we can also think about acceptable uses of ChatGPT, because there are some places in our curricula where using AI might actually be a really good help for the student. So let's move on. So one of the things that I've been trying to do in my classes is teaching students how to use ChatGPT in a productive way. So there are a lot of things that it can do to actually help student learning. ChatGPT can actually be a kind of tutor that every student has in their pocket, right, in the classroom. So my daughter is taking AP US History this year, and as everyone knows, AP US History is like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much content that that you've got to master for that class. But because the curricula for things like AP History are nationwide, ChatGPT does a really good job with review. So you can go into ChatGPT and say, create a review for AP US History Unit 3, and it will do a pretty good job coming up with things that fit the unit. Or you can just ask for reviews on topic questions, and it'll come up with lists of vocabulary terms and review questions. One of my favorites is explain this to me. So we've all been in the situation where we've given students a text that's a little bit above their reading level, that they're having difficulty understanding. ChatGPT is pretty good at summarizing texts. So for example, earlier this week, I did Brutus 1 with one of the Anti-Federalist papers with my government class. And I had a few students who said, Mr. Tittle, this is hard. This is, work that's coming out of the 1700s. I don't understand what this guy is saying. And so I said, I had them, struggle with it themselves for a little while. And then I said, why don't you take the text from Brutus 1 and put it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this for me. And they did. And it gave a good detailed summary of the arguments that were made in each paragraph of Brutus that they were going through. So it does a really nice job taking complex texts and explaining them in a way that a student may be able to more easily understand. And if the student takes the text itself and puts it alongside the explanation, that can be a really powerful thing in a classroom. Give me a list. So you can ask ChatGPT to list out some of the most important Supreme Court cases dealing with privacy issues, and it'll do a fairly good job. To list out, all of the, to give a list of the most common elements of the periodic table, and it can actually create tables of data. So last year, I used it in my government class. I had the students use it to make a list of all of the Supreme Court cases that we went through in the class. And it had the case, the people that were involved, the constitutional principles involved. It was a really nice study tool. If they're writing a paper, and this really depends on the teacher, but it could be an idea prompt. And we've all been there where we're writing a paper and we're staring at a blank page, right? Or we've got the introduction written and we don't quite know where to go next. You could say, I'm stuck. Here's what I've written so far. Please give me an outline of what I should talk about next. And it will do a nice job with that. Ask me questions about this topic. This is a great study tool. So the other day I was playing around with ChatGPT and I wanted to see how it did as a kind of study companion. And so I said, ask me questions about Renaissance Europe. And it asked me questions that were very similar to the kinds of questions that I would ask on the test. And then when I typed my responses, it actually critiqued my responses. So, and it did a pretty good job of telling me where I was wrong, telling me how the response that I made might have related to the correct response, but being clear about what the correct response was. And I think if this was used as an activity, maybe a review activity in class, it could be a really powerful one. So in a way, ChatGPT can be a really powerful virtual tutor. And I think that that could be a really useful thing for students. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Lane. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I know we're sort of at our end time now. We did have 2 questions that were asked, so I'm going to share those with you now and leave a little bit of space for each of you to respond. For those of you who can stick around, please do so. Thank you. And we will, again, record this and share it out. So if you do have to leave, we'll have this tail end of the 2 answers for you. Elaine, one of the questions, and again, these are open to both of you, but one of the questions that was asked was, if you could speak to how the assessment recommendations that you suggested relate to grading for equity initiatives that are prevalent in schools now. Are they contrary to those? Can they be seen to support those if they're approached in a particular kind of a way? How would you kind of comment on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's been part of our discussion. So from Oh, sorry, you guys. The joint is jumping at my school right now. You can hear that bell ringing. So that's been part of our discussions as we talk, especially about category weights. Um, and and I think that where we're at right now is I don't think I think the best teachers at my school look at it differently, but those of us who are in favor of category weights, those are of us who are in favor of total points, if I'm understanding the spirit of this question right, like we're both looking at it as like the way I do this with, making, in my case, when I make a final product category worth 80% of the grade, and the process category worth 20% of the grade, that contributes to equity. And then the same people who I think are just better at math, who are using total points, are finding the same thing. So I think what we're looking at is our own neurodiversity on our faculty. But yeah, I think that's at the center of issues of equity. So I don't know how in depth someone wants me to get. Like if I go too far in depth, I'll go over time and people just want to steal my lunch money anyway. But but I think there's a lot to that. I think that really is at the core of that question.
Yeah. I think focusing on formative assessment, it's not that you have more, okay. Formative assessment is really the key here, but formative assessment is the process by which we get to the summative, right? And the summative assessment will be the bulk of the grade, but the formative assessment is going to be the bulk of what we do. And if we're focusing on that, I think that does fit with the idea of grading for equity, that we're really trying to see how our students get to that end result, right? And grade that, and we're working with them from wherever they are in order to get there. So I think that's where it can be a great tool as a virtual tutor, helping students by rephrasing things or rewording things. I think it can actually fit into that rather well.
And maybe just as another point, I wonder maybe if Elaine, some of when you talked about grading for nonverbal communication, quality of questions, you also talked about sort of teaching that skill. So the grading piece doesn't sort of just happen with the assumption that students already know how to do that, but there's a process by which that becomes part of the educational experience, the teaching and learning experience, so that kids know exactly, and then they can kind of find ways, and through the relationships, I guess you talked about, maybe talk about where those strengths and challenges lie, given some differences. Is that something that would be part of that?
Yeah. So I should disclose I teach at an all boys school, and forgive me for painting in broad strokes. But something I've noticed from teaching in co-ed and teaching single sex, all boys, is sometimes boys are really lousy at the nonverbal communication. And so part of how I assess discussion, what I'll tell students is, all right, in this discussion, let's say the discussion is worth 10 points. If your nonverbal communication is positive and you don't say a word in the discussion, you are actually contributing an awful lot. And then I'll break down very concretely what positive nonverbal communication is, and they can recite it as from rote memory. We're awake, we're not off task with technology, we're not we're not messing around with a friend, we're looking at the person who's speaking. And so what I'll tell them is, like, you can get 7 or 8 out of 10 points for simply being an attentive audience member. And while the discussion is happening, I'm usually walking around the room looking for nonverbals. The discussion, I've been working formatively with the students as they're presenting their ideas. I'm confident in the quality of ideas, but I'm looking I'm looking very intentionally at their nonverbal communication. And what they need, what I really want them to understand is that that the most powerful presence in a discussion isn't the biggest extrovert in the room. It's the quietest person. You know, and I tend to say guy because it's guys here, but you know, that guy, if his presence tells people, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you out, everyone feels more comfortable taking intellectual risks. When that individual is like a stingy quiet, where he looks bored, you know, when they look tired, when they look like they're doing something else, we clam up in discussion. That person is the most powerful person in the room because they set the tone. And so I want my students to think about that very deliberately. So when groups are presenting, we don't have one group who's not presenting, who are trying to gather their thoughts about what they want to say when someone else is already talking. And so I make that the majority of the grade is for the discussion is who are you when the attention isn't necessarily on you. And when I incentivize that, what I find is the discussion gets better without me having to push that hard on ideas in the moment of the discussion. You know, that formatively we've worked through the ideas prior to the discussion. But by incentivizing the nonverbal communication, everything gets better. That's what I find.
Thanks. And Brian, again, this one's open to both of you, but I'll direct it first to you. The question or the comment that I'm going to reframe as a question was, can tone detection account for asking ChatGPT or AI to write in other styles?
Sort of. You're absolutely right. That if you have ChatGPT write something and then you say, could you say this in a more creative way? Or, you know, could you make some spelling and grammar mistakes in this text? It'll do that. But what I would encourage you to do is to experiment with having it write in some different styles, because there are still some patterns that you'll see that you'll be able to recognize. And it's not as much that you're detecting exactly ChatGPT's style. You're detecting the way that the student's normal writing style shifts when they move into the section that's been written by ChatGPT. So especially if you start out with some in-class writing assignments that are using a lockdown browser or just done on paper, and you read those so that you can get a sense of the way that the student's voice actually sounds, you'll be more confident when you see that shift. Because you're absolutely right. And then that's also one of the reasons that I would really shy away from using something like ChatGPT 0, like the GPT detection software. Because the way that GPT 0 works is it looks for more robust language usage. It basically looks for the variety of the words and the variety of sentence structure. And it's kind of, ChatGPT tends to have low variety. They call it burstiness, and in the sentence structure and in the different kinds of words that are used. And so if it's structured like that, then it'll say it's from an AI. But if you ask ChatGPT to be more creative, it will start to have some really wild sentence structure that won't really be detected in the same way. So.
Wonderful, thank you. I want to, I'll just bring this to a close, thanking all of the participants, Elaine, Brian, Jeff, for opening things up for us, and to all of the folks, the attendees, everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you very much. And again, we have this recorded and we'll share at the appropriate time. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.